Alright lads, welcome back to the channel. Gaijin have been up to quite a lot behind the scenes, adding quite a lot of new vehicles, but mainly breaking the game of War Thunder. I'm sure you've been having quite a lot of frame drops just as I have. It's been making it pretty hard to play, I'm not gonna lie. But I have been playing the T58, the newest heavy tank premium added to the American tech tree, and it's been met with some mixed results. Some people saying it's broken overpowered, some people are saying it's more of a gimmick. If you'd like to know what I think lads, stick around for the rest of the video. Alright lads, welcome back. So the T58 is the newest premium heavy tank coming to the US tech tree. It's currently located in the 5th rank and sits at battle rating 8.3 for arcade, realistic and simulator. Its battle rating of 8.3 does mean it can see some pretty brutal up tiers. Even at your own battle rating of 8.3, you're mainly going to be fighting guns that are fully stabilised using sub-caliber ammunition, where your heavy tank armour is largely redundant. But with a range of powerful ammunition and a 2.6 second reload, the T58 certainly does have some strengths. But how do we actually unlock this vehicle? Well, unfortunately it is a premium and it is only available at the time of recording for purchase on the Gaijin store. For the cost of around $50 or £40 sterling, you get the tank, 2,000 golden eagles and 15 days of premium time. At the time of recording, the T58 is one of 4 premiums available in the 5th rank of the US tech tree. We have the T114 light tank, as well as 2 medium tanks, the T54E1 and the T54E2. More about these premiums at the end of the video. At battle rating 8.3, the T58 actually has quite a substantial lineup. As you can see, we have quite a good mix between light, fast and heavy units available to us, including the M60 AOS or add-on stabilizer, the legendary M3 Bradley, the Sheridan, as well as the XM246, and even the Starship, giving you a good all-round mix of vehicles at 8.3. The notable weaknesses though is the lack of a decent CAS jet and a decent CAS helicopter in my opinion. Now we've got a general sense of what the T58 is, let's get into the nitty-gritty stuff, starting with the firepower. By far the main selling point of the T58, and the source of people claiming that it is overpowered, is the auto-loaded 155mm T180 cannon. With a drum autoloader holding 5 rounds and 1 in the chamber, combined with a reload speed of 2.6 seconds, this allows you to fire off 6 rounds in 13 seconds, which obviously gives you an amazing output of fire. You really can dish out damage, especially against the lighter armoured vehicles that you are going to be coming across. This is due to the nature of your stock shell, the T267 high explosive anti-tank shell. Now bear in mind, this is not a Cold War thin stabilised shell, it is a World War II heat shell, so it does have some limitations, especially against angled armour, where it will tend to bounce. But that being said, it does have 406mm of penetration, which is more than good enough for pretty much anything you come across at 8.3 upwards. It also contains 3.73 kilos of TNT equivalent, which allows you to overpressure pretty much every light tank in War Thunder. This is fantastic for absolutely mauling things like Marders or the BMPs, as well as that annoying Swedish SPAA that uses the Leopard 2A4's hull. That thing is seriously annoying in this thing. But anyway, one of these heat shells anywhere on the turret and it's just going to overpressure the whole thing. It isn't all just sunshine and roundabouts though. There are quite a few vehicles around battle rating 9.3 that do carry explosive reactive armour, which basically hard counter your heat shell. So while this excels at overpressuring the light vehicles that are quite annoying to kill, it does suffer a little bit when you do come across those more heavily armoured opponents. Surprisingly though, the T58 actually lacks a high explosive shell. You'd imagine that a 155mm gun, they would at least get a HE shell, but alas, no they don't. What they do get though is 2 other shells, one of which is the T152 high explosive squash head shell. It has 203mm of penetration and just under 17 kilos of TNT. This is a pretty potent round, especially against light lightly armoured opponents, but I can't help but feel that this round is rather redundant because the heat shell has both a substantial explosive damage and obviously over 400mm of penetration, so it's just outclassed in both ways really in my opinion. And the same can be said for our final round, the T29E1. This is the APC BC round that is commonly found on the T30, the other rank 4 American premium that also uses a 155mm gun. Now there's one pretty big downside that you can see, I've put it in red, it is a penetration of only 197mm. Now for quite a lot of vehicles that is going to be more than good enough. You also have a substantial TNT charge of 640 grams or just under it, which will obviously one-shot kill pretty much anything you penetrate. But again, the heat shell has literally more than double the penetration, and it also has 3.4 kilos of TNT equivalent. So again, there's not really any reason to use anything other than the heat shell on this tank. And as long as you aren't shooting at highly angled armor or something that carries ERA, the heat shell is generally a very effective round. It's a lot more effective than I assumed. So what are some of the downsides of the firepower of the T58? Well, to start with, it doesn't have a stabilized gun. Most opponents at this battle rating are at least going to have a vertical plane stabilizer like a lot of the Soviet vehicles, but the majority of the NATO tanks are going to be fully stabilized, which is going to put you at a huge disadvantage if you meet another enemy. Because of this, I've been playing the T58 rather defensively, just waiting for enemies to push. The tank actually does have quite a tall stature, so you can kind of go hold down in places that people wouldn't really expect. You can kind of just position yourself behind a hill and just kind of stick that big forehead out. Something I will say about the reload though is that you only have 5 rounds in that autoloader. Once those 5 rounds have been expended, it does take what feels like a couple of years for that autoloader to be refilled. So let's say you do fire all 6 rounds in your first stage ammunition, you can do that in about 13 seconds. It's then going to take you about 3 or 4 minutes to refill that ammunition. So don't go buck wild, you do want to be quite reserved, especially if there are quite a lot of people around you, you are going to run out of ammo very quickly. Another downside in my opinion is the default optic of a 6x zoom, which is quite high in my opinion. You can get quite tunnel visioned. You do have an optional 7.5x zoom, which I feel ironically isn't zoomed in enough for the optional zoom. It kind of leaves you in an awkward middle ground where you're very good for medium range engagements, but then ironically enough, your gun is too zoomed in for close range engagements, but too zoomed out for longer range engagements. But if you do find yourself in a long range engagement, the tank does actually come with a optical rangefinder. This gives you an estimation range to the target in about 3 seconds. But overall, when it comes to the firepower, I have been pleasantly surprised how good it is. It's pretty good at easily killing the light, annoying vehicles like the rat tanks. With that heat shell, you can basically just overpressure them with a single hit anywhere. So when it comes to the firepower, apart from the lack of a stabilizer and the kind of bad optics, there's not really too much to criticize here. But the same certainly cannot be said for the mobility and the survivability. We then come on to the survivability, and seeing as this tank uses the hull and drivetrain of the M103, it is pretty well protected against conventional weapons. A lot of the 30 and 20mm autocannons present around this battle rating are going to be relatively harmless, other than doing track and barrel torture obviously, which allows you to charge somewhat straight at them. Horatio Nelson would be proud. Just bear in mind that the anti-tank guided missiles that they sometimes carry will cleave straight through your armor scheme. Because the Americans were essentially fitting a lot of technology inside a relatively compact vehicle, any round that manages to penetrate the T58 is going to cause serious damage. As you can see from this cutaway, pretty much every inch of the tank is either a vital component, ammunition, or a member of your crew. Something that I noticed right away while playing this vehicle is that pretty much every time I got shot in the turret, it would destroy my gun breech, if not the gun barrel as well. This is obviously incredibly annoying. Also bear in mind that the autoloader system can be knocked out, so like a lot of the Soviet vehicles at top tier, someone can basically knock out your ability to reload. So if you fluff your first shot, you basically can't reload, which is a bit annoying. Also to note, the turret armor, it is 90mm thick on the roof, and it's about 90mm thick and highly angled, giving you a pretty substantial amount of protection. That being said though, every single hit, every single time I got shot in the top of the turret, it just completely destroyed the gun. even with like 30mm autocannon. So this is definitely one of those tanks that is going to get breached quite a lot. If you thought the Abrams was annoying at top tier with people shooting your gun breach and cheeks, this thing is going to be the next level of annoying. So just bear that in mind before you start playing it. Like a lot of the French tanks as well, this tank does have a very vulnerable neck area. It's obviously very flat and fairly thin, which does allow people to go through it. It is a relatively small target, but people at the minute aren't really familiar with how to kill this thing. They kind of panic when they see it. Well, that obviously will change, and in a couple of months people will be able to kill this relatively easily. Again, like the French Sommoir, which was very broken when it was first introduced because people didn't really know how to kill it, that thing is largely now easily killable for the average player. So just bear that in mind if you're watching this in several months' time, that this tank probably isn't as survivable as it is at the minute. So in terms of survivability, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The armour is essentially dead weight, but because the majority of the ammunition is stored quite low down in the hull, it can be quite hard to ammo rack this vehicle if you are playing it defensively and hull down. So with the lack of your gun stabilizer and the ability to be quite survivable when hull down, I would again recommend playing this tank quite defensively, staying on ridge lines or behind some sort of cover, hide your relatively vulnerable hull. You are going to get your gun breach not shot out of you, but hey, it's better repairing for 30 seconds than searching for a new game and paying a repair cost. But with the mediocre survivability covered, let's go on to the weakest aspect of this tank, which is going to be the mobility. Well, as I said in the survivability section, this tank uses the M103's hull and drivetrain, which does make it a little bit sluggish, I'm not going to lie. The rotation of the tank is pretty abysmal. It's going to let you down quite a lot in more urban fights. The top speed of 35 kilometers per hour does mean you are going to be overtaken by pretty much all of your teammates, especially if you get up tiered into a 9.3 game. You are going to be facing like the first generation of main battle tanks like the Leopard 1s or the OF40s, and they are going to get to points far faster than you do, which kind of throws a spanner into that whole thing of playing this tank defensively, because there's nothing really for you to defend if you can't get to a cap or a good ridgeline. I'd even go as far to say that this tank would be borderline unplayable if it wasn't for the incredibly good turret traverse rate of 30 degrees per second. I think in the dev server it was like 18 degrees, which did make it rather sluggish. But the mobility is still pretty terrible in terms of the hull, but you can swing that turret onto targets pretty quickly, which basically does redeem the tank in my opinion. So because the tank's big and heavy, again, you already know what I'm going to say. You're going to find a nice spot, defend it, pretend that you're the British in the 1800s, just plant your flag there and say, no one else is having this spot, it's mine. Just play it defensively, hold down, use that 2.6 second autoloader to good work. So lads, the T58, is it worth your hard-earned cash? Well, if you want to have a little bit of fun, it is a decent little vehicle for bobbing around in. You can troll people, you can, as I said, killing light tanks with this thing is a breeze. You just hit them literally anywhere and it just overpressures them. But for actually grinding out the American tech tree, I don't think it's going to be suitable for that many players. Tanks like these, they're big and scary now when people don't really know how to counter them, but in a couple of months time, everyone will know just to shoot it underneath the gun on that flat armor, and you're basically knocking out all the crew and the autoloader and the breach in one shot. So people will learn to deal with this pretty effectively. Compared to probably the most overpowered 8.3 premium in the game, the German Term 3, well, that thing is fast, fully stabilized. It has a hard-hitting gun with a 4-second reload, as well as a very potent cannon. In comparison, the T58 is rather slow, quite sluggish to maneuver, it's unstabilized, and while it does have a pretty decent gun and a very fast reload, it isn't really as up-tier proof as the Term 3. Compared to the other rank 5 American premiums though, the T58 is probably your best choice. With that being said, I wouldn't really recommend a rank 5 premium to begin with. Instead, if you're a newer player to the American tech tree, going for the rank 4 combo of the M46 Tiger and the T29, it is by far the better choice in my opinion. Much lower blast rating of 7.0 and a much more dominant lineup for the Americans there. The other obvious choice is to spend a little bit more money and go for either the M1 KV KVT or the M1A1 clickbait. That being said, this will put you in a very fast-paced, very skilled gameplay at 10.7. There are a lot of good players there, so if you're a new player to the game, you really do not want to be going for that higher tier premium. You want to learn the basics at lower tiers. But if you are going to grind out the American tech tree, I think you should. There's a saying in Britain called in for a penny, in for a pound. If you're going to be spending $50, you may as well spend a little bit more, put it up to $70 and get the clickbait or the KVT. So it's a good laugh if you want a little bit of fun, but I really wouldn't like to grind out the American tech tree with this vehicle. Anyway lads, thank you very much for watching the video. If you have any suggestions for what video you'd like to see next or what vehicle you want to see reviewed, then be sure to leave a comment down below. Also remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any of my videos. Finally, I'd like to say a massive thank you to all my YouTube members who make this channel possible. So a massive thank you to Lola Alphonse, Tans, Deboa LX, Schlunty, Van Halen, Diogenes, Pumpin, Econ, and Minami Productions. Thank you once again lads for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you did, leave a comment saying boom.